Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I will begin by reviewing each of the 13 episodes in order and then give an overall ranking at the end. Without further ado, let's get on with the reviews. So, the introduction fight was interesting. I found the CGI a bit off with the lava meta whose name is failing me right now. To be honest, I figured it would be a dream when Frost appeared, but hoped for a more interesting explanation. Given that the dream is a catalyst for Barry's timeline book, I can appreciate it more as it has a real tie to the plot. Now, I did worry that the repeated Wednesday trope was going to get tedious, and I think enough variety happened to keep it interesting. I like how it highlighted both Barry and Iris and how they dealt with it, rather than it just being the one perspective. I really like the new, more comic-accurate depiction of Captain Boomerang. For a rogue, he feels like a real threat, which is good. I was worried he would come off a bit goofy, but that actually wasn't the case. In terms of the other characters, the Chester-Allegra romance feels forced and has since season 7. The kiss felt awkward and overdue, but I guess the writers are committing to this now. We knew beforehand that Joe was leaving the show, so the way he was acting was expected of that fact. I think if we didn't already know, then this revelation at the end would be a good shock and would have caught everyone off guard a bit. Now, I don't know how I feel about the Caitlin Frost fusion thing. I think after Frost's death, I would have had Caitlin grieve for the rest of season 8, and had her hold some resentment towards Barry, and have that be some of the personal conflict this season. Now, I've been very excited ever since the set photos leaked to reveal Red Death, but on reflection, I wish I didn't know as I would have exploded with cheer at the Red Death logo. Look, I appreciate the writers are giving Batwoman a send-off, but to celebrate the Arrowverse, I think it should have been Oliver Queen as the fusion. Solid episode, 8 out of 10. Okay, so I wasn't a massive fan of this one. I feel like a lot and nothing happened simultaneously in this episode, if that makes sense. It seemed like Pied Piper was going to be the main focus of the episode, with the Fiddler acting as the villain of the week, but that really wasn't the case, especially since they only had 2 or 3 scenes each. I'm honestly not a big fan of what they're doing with the new Snow character. I wish they'd just left it with Caitlin grieving and learning to forgive Barry for wrecking her work. This feels like a massive reset in the worst possible way. I just hope they actually take the plot somewhere interesting. I do like Mark's dynamic with Team Flash. He definitely feels like the harsher edge I think the team needs at this point. Why is Cecile the most important person? The show is called The Flash. I think they need to focus on Barry. But this has been a problem for the past few seasons. The writers seem to love Cecile, and whilst I don't dislike her, I just don't think she's that important overall. I don't like that they're pushing the romance between Chester and Allegra. I'm not a fan of their ship, and it's wasting time in a limited final season. Look, the best thing about this one is the continuation of Red Death. I am genuinely excited to see where that goes. 6.5 out of 10, and that's me being kind. So, conceptually, I think this episode is very good and the groundwork is placed very quickly. I do enjoy a good heist story. I did find the fact that there was a specific function for each meta a bit on the nose though. It felt too safe for plot convenience. I would have preferred it to be each rogue can disable any of the obstacles. That being said, I think these rogues in particular are at their best in this episode. That is especially telling for Goldface and the Hotness, who are particularly stupid and do seem like a bit of a random choice for this. Stop dedicating time to Chester and Allegra's forced romance. There are limited episodes in this final series. Focus on Barry and Red Death. Speaking of, Red Death and the Flash's first interaction was amazing and scary. Part of me wishes this was the first time we saw the bat symbol. It was that well done. For the first time in a few seasons, it feels like there's a threat. This is Pied Piper at his best too. I always enjoyed the character, but this arc is highlighting how good of a character Hartley really is. This episode had a decent ending, especially with the twist. I didn't see it coming, to be fair. So, this is weird. I liked and I disliked this episode. First of all, the Flash's capture felt way too easy. I think at this point in his tenure as the Scarlet Speedster, Barry should have put up more of a fight. Even against Rainbow Raider, it could have been a cool action scene. Now, I'm not a fan of Iris generally in the show. I don't like what they do with her most of the time. But the scenes between her and Ryan are the best of this season so far. The suspense was amazing, and the fact she used her skills as a reporter made this more than just an exposition dump, which is good. I actually like Ryan in this scene. I don't like that they keep saying Ryan Wilder though. Once is fine to establish to people who may not have watched Batwoman, but more just feels really patronising. The other thing I wasn't a big fan of was Javicia Leslie's acting, which wasn't great. Only when she was getting angry did it seem really bad though. The rest was average. I think her I am vengeance line was fine and fun, but the rest of the Batman references were way too much. I wish we had more than 5 episodes for this arc. I think with 7 or 8 they could have done some really good stuff. Another 7.5 for this one. So, I think the best way to describe this one is wasted potential on so many fronts. So, Cecile, who is the most important character now for some reason, uses her powers to find Red Death. During this scene, she gets a vision of Mark which is so clearly a trap for the Flash, it isn't even funny or a clever twist in the episode. It felt like a way to pad out a very flimsy plot. The Flash talks to Grodd and convinces him to stop working with Red Death, giving him the chance to take her down. It's boring and very lacking. Now, Red Death did feel like a threat when she was policing the planet and pushing her moral stance. It was good, but all she did was kill one guy off screen. This is one of the grittiest and most threatening rogues, and we had one death. Back in Season 5 in the Flash Museum, it talks about Red Death's ridiculous death count. I liked the fight scene, it was fun and had some really solid CGI moments, but it was over too quickly and the Flash didn't even stop Red Death himself. Batwoman did. She should have assisted the Flash, as it's his show and his main threat. Whilst we're on Batwoman, we need to address her appearance. So Ryan goes missing and pops up. It's never revealed what happened, which is really stupid. I love Red Death in the comics, and the show didn't do the character justice whatsoever. Look, when I say this, I mean no disrespect to Batwoman or the fans, but it should have been Oliver Queen. You replace Batman with the Green Arrow for this one and it serves as a celebration for the Arrowverse, whilst finding an organic way to bring the characters back. 6 out of 10. Just a 6 out of 10. Okay, now this arc is over, I think it's time to talk about it a bit. I'm going to take a short break from the rankings just to discuss Red Death overall. First of all, I think the Red Death was wasted. In terms of overall structure, the first 3 episodes were way too slow and the last 2 were way too fast. I think they should have dedicated 2 more episodes to flesh out the story and characters more. Barry's rogue team were way too overused. Use them in the heist episode and that's it. Maybe keep Pied Piper as a possible ally, but none of the other ones. Red Death needed to kill more people. She overtook the planet and all we got was one bloody off-screen death. If the writers insisted on Goldface and the hotness, then Red Death should have killed them to prove how threatening she is. That should have been her first interaction with Barry, forcing him to witness it. They could have had an episode set in her timeline where we see her version of the Flash, also played by Grant Gustin, stopping her and all the build up to this corrupt version of her character. It would have been more impactful. There needed to be an explanation for where Batwoman was, and it could have been as simple as Red Death kidnapping her, like Zoom did. It would have made her team up with Barry in the end more meaningful. Having the reveal be Oliver Queen, who stole Wayne Tech, would then tie into the story and would explain why Ryan was kidnapped to begin with. I think the character needed more of a rampage to live up the version described in the future. In the end, she was very lacking and a massive waste. But what isn't a waste is my new Funko Pop, which weirdly came in the post today. So, IMDb was calling this the worst episode. I knew this before I watched it. Now, I'm biased because of my love for this show, but I do think that people are too harsh on it overall now. I don't think Eric Wallace is a great writer, but this one is something. This episode is actually the worst. It's a filler episode which focuses on the two least popular characters as they try to help one of the most uninteresting and annoying rogues clear her name and regain her powers. This is the last season, and it's a shorter season at that. Focus on the Flash. Or if we're stuck with filler so Grant can have a break, give the fans something they want, like a reverse Flash origin or something fun. There is so little to like in this episode, and the random ending of Allegra moving in was weird. Why did that have to be a focal point? Also, what's the point of Keone? She is irritating and thus far has added nothing of real value besides healing Mark. She is the perfect proof that this cast is way too bloated now, especially this close to the end of the series. I don't like being negative about The Flash, but this one is just horrible. 2.5 out of 10. Nothing much to enjoy here whatsoever. Okay, so I think the intent here was to have fun filler, and to some degree, I will call this more fun than the previous episode, but I don't think it's great overall. So, Iris and Nia get trapped in layers of a dream trying to escape before their bodies die in the real world, which is very cliche for a story. I can understand the big Dreamer fans and Supergirl fans loving on this episode for their character interactions and Easter eggs. It didn't really do much for me. At times, I was struggling to pay attention and not just go on my phone. I didn't find the dream stuff interesting. The dialogue was once again horrendous and the subplot was truly awful. Now, this subplot is quite possibly the worst subplot in the entirety of the Arrowverse. Mark is lusting after Keone after having a weird dream about her. He makes a horrible speech at a bar and comes across as a horrendous creep, which is annoying as Mark was my favourite side character up until this point. The main plot was boring and bland and I really disliked the subplot a lot. 4 out of 10. I don't feel like a lot happened really. Barry, Iris, and 3 of the worst written inspectors end up trapped in a time loop at Star Labs. That's essentially what happens for 40 minutes. I thought Barry and Iris were quite good together and carried the lackluster plot. It wasn't a fun episode. A bit like the Dream one, I just don't really feel like anything of value happened, which is frustrating me as this is meant to be the big final send-off season for the show. The twist was obvious. I called it from the start and it wasn't cleverly written. Also, she just sort of leaves at the end, like it wasn't important whatsoever, so there's that. How many times have I said this in these reviews? Nobody cares about Chester and Allegra. Stop wasting screen time and making me watch their cringy relationship. But it's worse. Cecila's there too as another person to bounce the conflict off. Another 4 out of 10. Boring waste of an episode. I can finally say it, we have a good episode this season. And not only a great penultimate story, but a great finale and send-off for the Arrowverse as a whole. So, the episode's premise is Bloodwork tries to use his lifeblood to take over the multiverse. So, the Flash, Kid Flash, Diggle, and Green Arrow / Spectre team up and defeat him. It's just a fun episode at its core, and Ramsey is a well-written villain for this dark one-off return. Now, this episode may be great, but it isn't perfect. The party at the beginning is pretty cringe, and I think it takes way too long to get going. They should have had the episode start with a party, and then have Bloodwork appear within the first few minutes. More time should have been dedicated to Bloodwork manipulating and overtaking Wally, as it was some really interesting character work for the Kid Flash, and in my opinion, the best scenes with the Kid Flash ever made. Ramsey Rosso, you have failed the city is, and probably will be my favourite line from this whole final season. Although a bit too short for my liking, the final fight against Bloodwork is visually really good. The lightning ropes were cool and the Spectre's glowing arrow was a great effect. The farewell dialogue is some of the best dialogue this show has had in a long while and it felt very earned. Solid 9 out of 10. Absolutely loved this episode.
Ramsey Rosso! You have failed this city!
Before I get to the last plot point in the series, I wanted to talk about the interlude episodes. Now, I have never been a fan of the interlude episodes Eric Wallace started implementing in Season 7. Most of the time, it's boring filler, but giving them a title as such seems to make the idea so much worse. I can appreciate in a larger season having a few smaller filler episodes to give Grant a bit of a break, especially if they're fun, but in a shorter final season like this, it's just horrible. Yes, the final crossover with Bloodwork was great, and I'm so happy we got it, but the others were pointless and generally horrible. Nobody wants to watch a Cecile and Allegra-centric episode, even if it tied into an arc. As I said earlier on, the Red Death arc needed at least 2 more episodes to become semi-decent, but instead we get Dreamer fanfiction and a boring bottle episode. I really wouldn't have minded if the other 3 were fun-centric plots. We could have had a Reverse Flash origin story, we could have had Bart and Nora take on Godspeed in the future, we could have had Barry and Kara take on Parasite or something. It just feels so unnecessarily wasteful. I'm currently doing a full rewatch of the Arrowverse, and when I get to the season, I will skip episodes 6 through 8 as they're awful. They could have had a thread throughout these 4 episodes to lead into Cobalt Blue. At least it would have felt more serialised that way. Hopefully, these last 4 episodes won't give me the blues. Well done, writing team. This is another solid episode and actually adds a lot to the lore. So, this episode takes place in the past, and gives Barry the opportunity to spend time with his parents before the death of his mother. This is good, as it gives Barry a real sense of closure. This episode is also a great celebration of the Reverse Flash, and the incredible job Matt Letcher does with the character. Dinner with his parents is perfectly juxtaposed by Barry having a drink with Eobard, his greatest enemy. So, at the beginning of the show, Barry alters the timeline and the majority of the show follows a different version of Barry. But this part of the finale corrects that, which is something I know the fans of the show have wanted for a long time. I love this episode. It cleverly sets up the Cobalt Blue storyline in this new world, whilst giving Barry a real sense of closure for the most horrendous day of his life. It also created an organic way to bring back a fan favourite version of Reverse Flash into the show one more time. A very deserved 9 out of 10. Okay, I like the stuff with Eddie. The slow decay of his mind as he learns his whole existence has been a lie is really good. I wish we had more of it. Way too much Team Flash stuff in this one. I like that Mark became the threat, and the slow unravel as the other characters realise what was happening to him. It seemed appropriate, as I would argue he is the strongest member of the team bar Barry. I'm not counting Keone, as she just doesn't exist in my own headcanon. The crystal manipulating Barry's allies is something Cobalt Blue would do in the comics, but it's more the negative Speed Force than anything taking control. There should have been a concrete tie to Cobalt Blue coming. Nobody cares about Chester and Allegra. I've said it all through these reviews, but Eric Wallace is wasting precious time on this pointless rubbish. Speaking of pointless rubbish, where is the Flash? This is his last few episodes. The focus needs to be on his character, not all these annoying characters nobody cares about. This is so mediocre. 6.5 out of 10. Alright, I want to start by saying I think there's a really good episode in here. Unfortunately, it is weighed down by a lot of trash. Okay, I can see what Eric Wallace is trying to do by having an episode in the past, the present, and the future, but I don't really think it worked the way he intended. Sure, it highlighted the magnitude of the negative Speed Force gem, but that's about it in my opinion. The biggest interaction between Barry and Eddie was really good, and Nora acting as the catalyst of the life he didn't have was a good use of her character. Speaking of Nora, I think this is the only episode where she didn't grate on me in some way, so that's actually pretty good. And the negative Speed Force using her to fight Barry is really good, as the last thing he would want to do is hurt his daughter. All the future Team Flash stuff was absolutely horrible. I have no idea why it's there, and why had none of them aged? Why did Cecile look the same after 25 years? It's so stupid. Nora could have just operated alone. You could have had a throwaway line to Bart being away hunting down Godspeed or something, which would allude to his return, and that would be it. Better than the episode before, but let down by so much unnecessary waffle. 7 out of 10. So, this is the grand finale to the show, and the end of the Cobalt Blue storyline. Look, I was really excited by the fact that loads of my favourite speedster villains were returning, but they ultimately did nothing. All of them exist for near 10 minutes of screen time collectively. Now, it's not only annoying that they don't do anything, but so bad to see the likes of Allegra and Cecile are powerful enough to stop Reverse Flash and Godspeed. You know, villains that Barry struggled to take down. Which shows Eric Wallace doesn't understand what he's writing. Savitar is probably the most true to himself, and does the most interesting thing of the three by attempting to kill Nora. The counter to his attack was pretty cool and not what I expected. Well, Zoom was brooding as usual, but then got stopped by the God of Life, who shouldn't even be a thing on the show in the first place, so, you know. Speaking of Keone, she was meant to be the only way Barry could stop Cobalt Blue, but she just tells him what to say. Anyone could have given Barry some soppy motivational speech. Again, like a lot of the villains, Barry tells Eddie to stop, and he just stops like that. With 20 minutes left of the episode. It was such a letdown to a good villain up until this point. I was really vibing with Cobalt Blue amongst everything else in this final story. I appreciate the final scene, but it wasn't what I wanted from the show. I wanted Barry to become the lightning bolt and go full circle. The new hero cameos were pretty cool though, I did like that bit. The episode was alright, very much nostalgia bait. Another 7 out of 10. Just before I get onto the ranking, I would like to talk about the Cobalt Blue storyline. Well, these 4 episodes were interesting. In some ways, I think they're more disappointing than the Red Death arc, as the opening episode is the strongest episode of the whole series and the best introduction arc since Eric Wallace took over during Series 6. But then it declines into a mediocre final episode. Rick Cosnett is great, as always, but I felt like this was more of an epilogue for Eddie Thorne / Malcolm Gilmore than a full story for Cobalt Blue. As it stands, he only refers to himself as Cobalt Blue like 1 time in the whole show.
Oh my god. Eddie?
It's Cobalt Blue now.
Which is disappointing as it almost feels like an afterthought. Now, I know there's cobalt radiation from the crystal and that is referenced, but I had hopes for more than that. There's too much time dedicated to a build-up for it to amount to nothing. He gets the costume in the finale and wears it for what, 15 minutes? And the episode which should be his villain focus features all the other iconic big bads, which undermines him, even though they don't do anything and ultimately add nothing. The story wastes too much time on side characters. I truly think there's enough of a runtime here for a fleshed out Cobalt Blue story, and acts as a finale, but half the runtime focuses on the show's awful side characters, and it wastes too much screen time. So what they got right was great, but there was too much of a letdown. The Cobalt Blue arc didn't feature Cobalt Blue, which sounds ridiculous, but it's annoyingly accurate to this story. So here it is, my ranking of the episodes. So that was the final season of The Flash. I'm not going to pretend this season wasn't a dull mess because the majority was. I think having 2 plots was too ambitious for a 13 episode run, even for a stronger writing team than we got. While I appreciate the on-screen portrayals of Cobalt Blue and Red Death, but I feel they should have picked one of them and had the full series focus on them, or have the Reverse Flash be the villain for the entirety and go full circle into Barry's legacy. I'm annoyed there were interludes as there was no need whatsoever and it just seems very lazy to me. Those are just my thoughts though. I would love to hear what you all think in comments down below. This video took me quite a while to make, so I would really appreciate if you could hit that like button and subscribe. It will help my channel continue to grow even more. Stay close as I try to post new content as often as possible.